Welcome back to another edition of Storytime with David Booker. Today we're going to be reading from the Ledge of Creation, and I believe I promised that we'd be reading about the pirates. That's chapter 15. Let's pull this one out. We're going to be reading Ledge of Creation by Steve Wolfe. Chapter 15, Ingenious Plan. The scruffy bunch of reformed sailors said "Arr" and "Shiver me timbers" a lot as they locked the doors with the biggest padlocks they could find. Having no further orders and high on adrenaline, they were hoping for a little resistance, but none came. The crew of misfits indulged in a masked brawl on the top deck. Across the corridor from teams Cogs and Clocks, Zodiac listened to the sound of fighting spilling into his room from above. He sighed and sat down to read a book. His accommodation was very comfortable. It had a large single bed and plenty of room for a desk and a generous reclining chair to relax in. Teams Cogs and Clocks were not so lucky. Their room was like a packed commuter railway carriage. A crappy two-car train, a complete and utter inadequate excuse for public transportation, cramming as many people into as small an area as possible. The only free space was up above, and Stan had discovered it, escaping the sardine-like conditions by scrambling up on to the beams across the ceiling. "Way-hey!" he shouted for no apparent reason. Lying in his bunk, Derek stared up at the ceiling, looking thoughtful. "Stan, are there any loose panels up there?" "No, hang on." Stan pushed at the wooden ceiling panels. "Woo, I found one." "Shh," Derek whispered. "We don't want to alarm the captain and his crew." Stan nodded and pushed his board upwards. It gave way just enough so he could peer inside. "What do you see?" said Barry, holding his stomach. Derek just couldn't resist. "Maybe it's the sea," and he fell about sniggering. Stan ignored the crap joke and peered through the little gap between the lip of the floorboard and its frame. "It's a wooden conduit. It looks like a space between the decks." "This is perfect," said Bernard, peering up into the hole. "We can scuttle from one end of the ship to the other undetected. So now we can move about the ship undetected. How does that help us?" said Austin. The team stared at one another for a while with blank faces. "Well, we could manipulate the rudders," said Reg, who was lying in his bunk reading a cycling magazine. What was that, Reg?" said Derek. Reg gave Derek a dirty look. Sorry, I meant to say, what was that, Steve?" Reg acknowledged the apology and continued. "Assuming the space between the deck leads all the way to the stern, I'm certain we should have access to the rudder post. We manipulate it and then use our dear friend Craig here to navigate us." There was a stunned silence as the team looked at one another open-mouthed. "What a brilliant idea," Colin said, buttering yet more bread. Reg nodded. "Of course it is." Justin looked thoughtful. "Assuming we find the rudder post, how do we manipulate it? With our bare hands?" "Have faith, my dear Craig," said Greg with a smile. "All we need is a hammer, a rope, and 2 thick nails." "And who's Craig again?" said Austin. Morris Hammer was standing on the small prow deck of the Ellis Splinter, facing the prow. Sitting on a small reclining chair behind him, Buck Swad watched the huge henchman with fascination as he approached to lap up at the wind. Bucks thought he looked like a dog hanging out of the window of a car being driven at speed. A crow appeared from nowhere and landed on the deck. Morris Hammer picked it up with his shovel hands and tried not to squash the bird. Clumsily, he unraveled the piece of paper attached to its leg and held it up to his face. He turned the paper around and round, examining it with a confused look. "Morris," said Buckswad wearily, "give it to me. You obviously cannot read." Morris handed over the now screwed-up message. "What does it say?" Bucks held up a chubby finger as he read through the communique and smiled. "It appears your plan is working. Captain Tinfoil is on course for Yellowstone Fort." Morris grunted his satisfaction. "All we need now is for Captain Shellshackle from the Ellis Tangerine to do his job, and we are home free." Buck continued. Morris grunted again as he walked off along the deck. boards bowing beneath his weight. "Where are you going?" Buck said, surprised he had even asked. "Pottery class. They have class for beginners today and in the recreation room on the lower deck." Buck stared at the giant man dressed in his traditional dark suit and open-neck shirt and wondered how on earth he was going to make a delicate pot with his humongous hands. He was speechless. The LS Tangerine, a fine ship, was plying through the water at a respectable rate of knots, her sails billowing in the wind as she carved for the sea. Below deck in their tiny room, the girls from Team Lipsticks and Shoes were busy applying lipstick, polishing their shoes, washing their hair, and generally doing girly stuff that took girls 20 times longer to do than boys. In the wheelhouse, Captain Shellshackle discreetly altered his course towards Yellowstain Port and smiled. He then ordered his cabin boy to write a message and send it by crow to the Ellis Winter. The girls were none the wiser. On board the LS Potato Pie, Reg crawled through the gap between the decks toward the stern of the ship, found what he was looking for, and grinned. In front of him, a long rounded wooden shaft rotated occasionally as it made its way down toward the tiller and the rudder. Reg beamed with delight and tapped the post. His plan was going to work. He tilted his head upwards, his eyes tracing the length of the post until it disappeared into the deck above on its way towards the helmsman's wheel. Happy with his discoveries, he crawled back towards his team's cramped cabin. Around the same time, dropping out of a hole in the ceiling like a ninja warrior, Bernard Bianchi landed quietly on the floor of the storage room. He scanned the room. "Ropes and nails," he muttered to himself. "Where will I find?" Heavy footsteps sounded in the corridor outside. Bernard leapt behind a couple of barrels, and moments later the only door into the small wooden room was flung open wide, flooding the room with light as the recognizable figure of Scar and Patch crossed the threshold. "Bloody duck!" muttered Patch. "Why can't he have a proper bird like a parrot?" Scar shrugged as he searched through the crates looking for Dario the duck's favorite treat, roast chicken. "Should just give it a bread, Patch continued. Scar looked up from a crate. "We shouldn't. It'd be bad for him." "You're what?" "Bread. It ain't good for a duck. It clogs him up, see. But Dario loves a bit of roast chicken." Patch stared at Scar in confusion. "Surely eating chicken is cannibalism." Scar smiled. "How can it be? Dario's a duck, not a chicken, you idiot." Pat shrugged. "Oh, yeah." Behind the barrels, Bernard rolled his eyes. "Here it be," said Scar. "Roast chicken flakes, premium brand." Scar picked up the crate and headed up the door. Patch turned to follow, but stopped in his tracks and sniffed the air. "What is it?" Scar whispered. "Not sure. It's an odd smell." Patch sniffed again and turned around. Behind the barrels, Bernard carefully loaded his Diablo. As Patch stepped forward toward his hiding place, taking deep sniffs. Patch looked around as if trying to gauge what the smell was. As he stretched his hand out towards the barrels, a familiar angry sound burst from Captain Tinfoil's quarters. "Whack! Whack!" "Come on, Patch. Dario's hungry," said Scar. Pat turned to his pirate mate, scanned the room one last time, and shrugged. "Arm Yarty. I received far too little plunder to be security guard." And the two pirates left the small storeroom and the pallet of roast chicken flakes, premium brand. Bernard let out a sigh of relief and disengaged his Diablo. Once he was sure it was safe, he sniffed at his armpit and frowned. There was no foul smell emitting from them. He wondered what Patch had smelled. Pushing the thought to the back of his mind, he continued with his mission. The storeroom was lined from floor to ceiling with shelves housing crates and brown bags full of all kinds of stuff. Barrels of fresh water were scattered randomly around the room. Bernard eyed a couple of thick, heavy nails that had been hammered into a wooden pillar to secure a mighty bags of pirate loot. He grinned. His luck was in. He crept towards the bags and lifted them off the nails with ease, as if they were empty, and placed them on the floor. The nails had been sunken 3/4 of the way into the wood. Prizing them out was going to take time. and time was a luxury Bernard didn't have. He grabbed hold of the first nail, did a quick calculation in his head, and worked out a special financial investor's mathematical formula that would release the first nail. He tugged at the nail in a series of controlled maneuvers, making sure the correct calculated angle was incorporated in each pull. After only 2 minutes, the first nail gave up its residence and dropped into his hand. Bernard repeated the process of the second nail and nodded with smug satisfaction as he thought about his maths degree. Scanning the room for anything that resembled a hammer, he found a heavy bar with a blunt end. Pocketing the bar, he climbed back up into the gap, replaced the wooden tile, and crawled back towards his teammates. While Bernard was busy acquiring the nails for Red's plan, Barry Baza-Bianchi and Stanley Stan Cogsworth were preparing to execute Mission Rope-a-Dope, a daring plan to snatch a length of rope stashed at the bow on the top deck. Barry's slender frame slid along the conduit with ease. Stan's bulkier frame, on the other hand, hindered his momentum. He cursed every other second, banging elbows and cracking his head. On reaching a vertical conduit that led upwards, they crawled up a space between the walls, coming to a stop against the underside of the top deck flooring. Oddly, a loose panel happened to be located exactly where they needed to exit the conduit. Some might have thought it was planned. "Ready, Stan?" Barry whispered. Stan nodded as he checked his pockets for the 9th time. Everything was still there. Barry eased up the wooden panel, peering around the top deck, and quickly dropped it back into position. He held his finger to his mouth and looked back up at the boards. The panel creaked as weight bore down upon it, sending dust particles onto their heads, and above them voices could be heard. "Ye be on night watch, then, will ye, eh?" A second pirate grunted. He didn't seem happy about it. "Shiver me timbers, I'm off to me pit." Another grunt followed, and the panel creaked once again as the weight moved away. Barry pointed his finger upwards towards the panel, indicating that the night watch pirate was sitting inches from where they would emerge. "What do we do?" said Stan, showing signs of great agitation. He didn't like to do nothing at the best of times, and doing nothing in a tight, hot, sweaty place was not helping at all. Mother Nature's personal cloud hovered undetected above the dweller's tunnel as she watched with fascination. The stupidity of Clayton's sneer played out. He was still in the company of the dwellers, and his stay appeared to be extending by the minute. Frank was counting. "That would be 27, Mother Nature." "Is that a record?" "I do believe it is." Mother Nature watched as Clayton's sneer was tossed back into the tunnel yet again. "That will be 28 times, Mother Nature nodded, captivated by the inability of certain individuals to learn from their mistakes. "Where's the peloton now?" Frango, sitting on a small stool by Mother Nature's feet, looked up at her commanding presence as she eyeballed him, waiting for an answer she had wanted 5 minutes before the question had even been raised. And even though she knew the exact location of the peloton. "They're currently crossing the Sea of Biscuits, Mother Nature," Frango replied. The mother of the ledge appeared deep in thought. "Are they heading in the right direction?" Frango paused as he checked the report. It would appear that one ship is headed in the right direction. And the other two? Frango already knew that Mother Nature had the answer to her own question, but he still replied obediently. "The Outlaw's Potato Pie and the Liz Tangerine appeared to be heading towards Yellowstone Port rather than Mother Landing." Mother Nature stroked her chin and stood up. Straining her apron, she walked to the edge of the cloud and stared out into a vision of paradise. A flock of yellow birds flew by as she remained silent for a moment. "Why do you think they are doing that? Looks as though someone is cheating Mother Nature." "It does. And what am I supposed to do about it, Frangle?" "I'm not sure you can do anything about it, Mother Nature. You yourself implemented the non-interference policy on the ledge." Mother Nature returned to her polished wooden chair. Sitting down, she tutted. The cushion supporting her back was clearly too thin. Pushing her glasses back into position, she said, "I did, didn't I? I believe someone else will need to intervene on my behalf." Frangle nodded and let up a couple of seconds tick by. Mr. Jacksaw, your plant on the LS potato pie, has been busy with his mini saw. Mother Nature showed no response and merely tutted several times at how uncomfortable her chair really was. The loose panel in the ceiling of the bunk room was lifted with deft silence. Bernard dropped through, landing on all fours and practically purring like a cat high on some illegal substance. "I got a hammer and nails," he said triumphantly, standing tall with his hands on his hips. His reception was not what we'd hoped for. Reg, who was writing a note to himself for when or if he ever got his memory back, acknowledged Bernard with a gentle nod. The rest of Team Cogs and Clocks barely noticed his arrival. He had been that quiet. "Please don't all queue up and thank me," Bernard muttered to himself. He placed a heavy bar of nails by Reg and climbed into his bunk, looking dejected. Inside the tight vertical space under the forecastle, Stanley Cogsworth twitched like a teenager on heat. "It's gone very quiet. Do you think he's asleep?" Stan whispered. Barry strained in his ears. "I think I can hear snoring." Barry eased up the little hatch and scanned the area. The pirate's stretched out feet were within a foot of their exit hatch. His eyes worked their way up the recumbent figure, scanning the pirate for any movement. Straining forwards, he could just make out the head of the pirate resting against a barrel. He was sleeping like a baby. The tall, thin cyclist carefully replaced the hatch and whispered to Stan, "I think we're good to go, but we must be very quiet. The pirate is asleep, but he's very close to our exit. There are a couple of wooden barrels to the left of the hatch. Head for them and hide." Stan nodded, his unspent energy bouncing his head up and down like a nodding dog on a crack. Barry raised the lid on the hatch and placed it to one side. The sudden explosion of fresh air almost made him cough as he hit the back of his throat. He slithered out of the hatch and crouched over the exit, eyeing the snoring pirate. Catching a whiff of the cool sea air, Stan shot out of the conduit and scampered behind the barrel while Barry replaced the hatch. Once the hatch was secure, Barry slithered his long frame around the barrels and sidled up to Stan, who thought Barry resembled Mr. Fantastic from the Fantastic Four. "Now what do we do?" Stan whispered, relieving his pent-up energy through a series of little press-ups. Barry shook his head in disbelief. As he scanned the deck, something caught his eye. "Look, over there," he whispered and pointed towards the opposite side of the deck, where a piece of thick cloth was covering a mound of equipment, held on at four corners by heavy lumps of iron. Stan followed his gaze. "Looks like a pile of junk." "Maybe it is, but there may be a rope hidden among it. What do you think?" "It's a bit exposed," Stan replied, spinning his arms around quietly. "It is, but you should be okay once you've slipped under the cloth out of sight." Stan snapped back like a bolt of lightning. "What do you mean I should be okay? I'm not going." Barry pursed his lips and sucked in a mouthful of air. "Stanley, my twitchy friend, I cannot go. I'm too tall. You, my friend, are the right candidate for this mission." Stan screwed up his face. "Mission? All we're doing is pinching a bit of rope for Reg's mad scheme." "Yes, we are. Now off you go. I'll keep watch." Dan twitched involuntarily as Barry stood up and peeped out over the stacked barrels. "See? Stan, you need to go. You need to burn off some energy." Stan stared at how freakishly tall Barry was and concluded that he looked like a cartoon character. He also found it hard to disagree with him. He was in need of some light exercise. Reluctantly, he crawled out from behind the barrels and shimmied along the splintered wooden deck. Barry watched as Stan's feet disappeared under the thick cloth. A stand-shaped pump appeared intermittently as he shuffled around the pile of equipment. A couple of minutes passed by before his bushy, unshaven face came into view. "Found some," he whispered. Barry nodded. "How much do we need?" Barry shrugged. "I don't know." Stan sighed and crawled back under the cloth, reappearing moments later with a coil of thick rope. He crawled back to the barrel, pushing the rope across the deck towards Barry, who smelled the size of Stan's find. "How much rope have you got?" said Barry. Stan stared at the huge coil. "A lot." Barry sniffed the air and farted. "Come on, let's go." He crept back to the loose wooden panel, stealthily removing it and signaling Stan to edge forwards with the rope. As Stan poked his way towards the open patch, they heard something stirring. Another sharp ring out into the air. Barry turned towards the pirate and froze, his face filled with fear. Finding himself still a guest in the dweller's tunnel, Clayton sneered, picked himself up off the floor again. He had lost count of the number of times he had been thrown back into the tunnel by what he now referred to as the little bastards. His arms were bruised and his legs were red with scratches and cuts caused by the impact of hitting the hard ground. He was tired, hungry, and very, very mad, but people like Clayton didn't learn from their mistakes. They continued on their self-righteous path of destruction, normally ending up on the losing side. And Clayton, being Clayton, was definitely on the wrong side of the dwellers. Were not bothered about how many times Clayton would attempt to leave. In the crazy little world, Clayton was a plaything. However, people eventually became bored with their playthings, even dwellers. And now the dwellers were bored, and as Clayton stormed the pyramid of the little bastards, blockading the exit for the umpteenth time, the dwellers simply swung open like a barn door. Clayton, expecting a sharp return to his starting point, realized he was finally free. And then he realized he was going too fast for the sharp bend that hove into sight. Then he realized the bend had no barriers, and it was a sheer drop-off. And when he looked back, he realized the dwellers were watching with devious smiles. Then he vanished over the edge. This was going to hurt. A foggy haze of sluggishness clouded the waking pirate as he stared at Barry and Stan. Confusion filtering across his face as he slowly put 2 and 2 together and came up with 5. Seeing the pirate stir, Stan dived into the hatch, shouting, "Woohoo!" and holding on to one end of the rope, leaving Barry frozen to the spot as the rope uncoiled rapidly by his feet. The pirate scratched his head and appeared to smile. It took another 5 seconds of polite smiling as the non-lubricated cogs of his brain struggled to turn. Before the lights finally flickered on behind his eyes, jumping to his feet, he stood up and drew his sword. Gone was the pleasant smile, now replaced with an angry, toothless growl. Swinging the sword from side to side, the groggy pirate advanced on the frozen Barry. Full of excess wind, Barry's bottom began to... Sorry. Barry's bottom began to sing Latin of hope in the Lord. His heart emanated at high speed. He needed to unfreeze, and he needed to unfreeze fast. Stan crashed to the bottom of the vertical conduit with a heavy thud. Meters of rope followed, clattering onto his head as he disappeared under a mountain of intertwined hemp. Moments later, he emerged from the top of the pile, panting, and noticed the rope was stretched taut, all the way back up to the hatch. He gave it a light tug, but it didn't move. He stared up into the conduit at the black square of the opening. "Huzzah!" he whispered. There was no response. "Huzzah!" he whispered again, only louder this time. Still nothing. Stan pulled hard on the rope and felt something move. Swinging his sword aggressively as he could, the now fully functioning pirate lunged at Barry, hoping to slice him into little chunks. And as the foul-smelling man of the sea swung his blade to administer the killer blow, something pulled firm under Barry's foot, and he lost his balance and fell backwards. The tip of the sword skimmed Barry's shirt, slicing it open as he fell back, just enough to prevent any bodily injury. Pirate swung again, but it was all in vain. Barry toppled backwards into the conduit and crashed down onto a startled Stan. "Huzzah!" Stan spluttered from under the lanky, once slender frame. "Are you all right?" Barry looked himself up and down. "My shirt," he cried. "The missus is going to kill me now." "Well, she'd better hurry up," said a voice from above, "because I plan on killing you right now." "You bloody pirate!" Barry shouted, looking up. "Look what you've done to my shirt!" Barry Bianchi was a mild-mannered individual, and anger was not part of his DNA. although on occasion he had been known to lose it and write a strong-worded letter to the authorities. The pirate looked down on Barry's seething face and seemed to lose track of what he was doing. Yeah, sorry about that. I only meant to cut you in half. Well, you missed. Who's going to pay for this, then? Hissed Barry. The pirate stared into the counter and thought for a moment. It be not me. I'd be low on coin. Pirating. I assume it depends on who you have robbed, said Stan with a disapproving tone. The pirate laughed. Are ye serious? We don't rob from anyone anymore. It's an our profession. See, we be paid to sail the seas and stay out of real trouble. We have no idea, have you? Yeah, occasionally we might nick someone off, but a normal day consists of... The pirate stopped mid-sentence as a blunt instrument struck his head hard. His eyes momentarily rolled around in confusion. His legs turned to jelly, and the night shift pirate fell headfirst into the hatch. His arm seemingly reached into the conduit towards Barry and Stan, but disappeared back over the lip of the hatch as somebody or something dragged the pirate backwards. Fear replaced Stan and Barry's newly formed bravado, and a fresh smell of bottom burps assaulted their noses. What's going on? Stan asked, looking up into the gloom of the night through the hatch. I have no idea, but I think we should make an exit and fast. Stan nodded, his eyes growing wider. That will not be necessary, said another voice from above the hatch. The wooden boards creaked as a figure approached the opening. Hauling the breath and holding on to each other, Stan and Barry peered skywards as his face came into view. Zodiac! Squealed the two buddies. All right, that's chapter 15. I'll talk with Steve and see if we can do chapter 16 next time. And it's, well, these are just fun stories in here. I love them all, so I kind of like to read the whole book. So that's from Ledge of Creation. That's the first chapter of the Pirate section by Steve Wolf. And the next video will probably be from Joe's Journey, where we read chapter 3. So I hope you'll be here for that. And it's time for me to go, so thank you for visiting, and I hope to see you on my next video. By the way, this and Joe's Journey and all of my books, which there are the 7 stories of the Time Is series, as well as my 2 books of shorts, Glimpse of My Shorts and Another Glimpse, are all available on Barnes & Noble's, Amazon, and my books. I'll have to check on the other ones and see if they're on Smashwords, but my books are available on Smashwords. So please take a look at them. Smashwords has some ebooks really cheap. The others are reasonably priced. I'm just hoping you buy. So see you next time, and thank you for visiting.